Welcome to episode 258, Before and After a Psychedelic Experience, Integration and Harm Reduction in Clinical Practice, featuring Dr. Peter Addy, licensed professional counselor and licensed mental health counselor. Make sure to subscribe to be alerted about future episodes. By Clearly Clinical, learn, grow, shine. Hello to our listeners. My name is Beth Irias, and I am really looking forward to the conversation that we're going to be having today with Dr. Peter Addy. One of Dr. Peter's specializations is psychedelic use, but more than that, the ethical use of psychedelics in or outside of therapy, and kind of these elements that many of us don't even really think about, because psychedelic use for trauma treatment, for addressing pervasive mental health concerns has just blown up on social media. So Dr. Peter has come to us today to really, I think, correct some misinformation and also give us some guidance that can help guide a more ethical practice. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Peter.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's I love talking about this stuff. I'm excited and passionate about it and just sharing with wider audiences.
Fantastic. So you're a licensed professional counselor. You're also a mental health counselor. You did some work at Yale School of Medicine. Tell us a little bit more about your background and then how you came to have this particular specialization.
Well, I came from a research background. I have a PhD in clinical psychology, so I definitely learned a lot of the clinical stuff, but I wanted to be a research scientist. That was like my goal. And I figured, the therapy part of it, that's a cool side gig or secondary concern. But so I learned a lot about that. I specialized in substance abuse treatment, got to Yale, which was, amazing. Worked in a lab there, 3 years postdoc, 3 years as a research scientist. I really liked in my residency, half of the week, I was working in a research lab where we would pay people to take drugs. Mostly THC, but also things like ketamine and salvinorin A, which is an atypical psychedelic that that's kind of my claim to fame. That was my focus. And then the other half of the week, I would go across town to a substance abuse treatment unit, outpatient clinic, and help people to stop taking drugs. So I really got to see the wide range of experiences and just the way people talked about this stuff and how it affected people, positive and negative. Over the years, I left the research world and got into clinical work, and then I got into supervision and teaching and education as well. I've taught at the community college here. I've been doing some CE work, such as, things like this. And what I'm really working to expand on is more of this psychedelic informed or psychedelic affirming training for mental health professionals. So I've been doing this in one way or another for, 15 years or so.
Very cool. I'm sure you've seen some things. Some very interesting things. So framing this conversation, some of us are familiar with the term like psychedelic assisted therapy or, lots of different, ketamine assisted, for example. And you've used the term psychedelic integration. Can you separate out these different words and explain what these concepts mean, just so for the purpose of this conversation, everybody's on the same page?
Yeah, it's important stuff. And that's something I got from my research life was the importance of defining your terms, operationalizing definitions. If you don't do that at the beginning of the paper, then, everything else is just kind of fuzzy and confusing. Or understanding, I teach my clients all the time, what even is an emotion? That's a very complicated and hard question sometimes for people. So what even is a psychedelic and what are these different kinds of approaches? I use psychedelic in a very broad sense. Some people can be very strict about it. But anything that leads to these kinds of transcendent or exceptional kinds of experiences. So the most common one these days is psilocybin. Also ketamine. I provide ketamine therapy. Ketamine is sometimes a psychedelic, sometimes it isn't. I think it is. MDMA, also kind of a border case, but I think, I put it under the umbrella. So psilocybin is the most popular one. Of the kind of classic psychedelics, but there's also a lot of interest in things like LSD and ayahuasca, and there's all sorts of stuff out there. So umbrella term, psychedelics. Most of what you'll see in CE trainings or on Netflix documentaries or things like that is psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, or specifically, ketamine assisted therapy, psilocybin assisted therapy. And that's, as the name suggests, it is psychotherapy. It is trained, manualized, usually therapy by usually licensed people in a very specific context. And then the psychedelic assists that therapy. So maybe a 3-month course of intense trauma treatment with 2 or 3 sessions with MDMA sprinkled throughout. That's a very resource, time, and money intensive process. Outside of that, we have psychedelic use in all sorts of different ways. People use psychedelics for therapy on their own because they can't go to one of these clinical trials, or just to have fun, connect with their spouse, for spiritual purposes, for all sorts of reasons, to escape pain and suffering. Now, there's 100 reasons why people use psychedelics. So outside of a clinical or research setting, people are using these things. Your clients might be using them right now, whether you know it or not. So a broader perspective, a broader way of interacting with these things as a therapist is to provide psychedelic harm reduction and integration therapy. So I like to call myself a before and after man. So people, I also do the ketamine work now, which is the during, but for many years, I've been doing ketamine therapy for about a year. I've been doing psychedelic harm reduction and integration therapy, which is a mouthful, but I've been offering that for 6 or 7 years. So I'm a before and after man. I talk to people, they might come to me and say, I saw this great documentary, or my friend had this amazing experience. I'm thinking of doing this thing. What do you think? And we identify risks, and we try to reduce those risks. We identify intentions. I want to minimize harms and maximize benefits. And then the integration is usually considered to be afterwards, where someone might come to me and say, I had this experience. I took these mushrooms last week, or 15 years ago, I had this experience, and it still sticks with me positively or negatively, right? So I talk to people before or after, and I very clearly am not encouraging people to do this stuff. I mean, just in general, our listeners, any of us, we're not really advice givers, or at least the way I think of therapy. I don't, like, people sometimes come to me, they're like, Dr. Peter, what should I do about this thing? I don't know. I'm not the expert. Why do you think I know anything? I'm an expert on all sorts of stuff, but like, should you quit your job? Like, I don't know.
With that symptom, you should go to the doctor, but outside of that, we're generally not shoulders.
Yeah. Or even something, psych meds, should I stay on my Lexapro or get off of it? Like, we can talk about that for hours and hours, but I'm not going to tell you what to do. That is just, it's ethically, professionally risky, and it takes away agency. And that's one of my main things as a therapist. I love when people feel more agency in their lives and in their treatment. So I'm not telling people to take psychedelics or not to. Most of the time, these things are criminalized. Most psychedelics are Schedule 1 controlled substances. Even here in Oregon, people get confused about that sometimes. So I don't want to encourage my clients to commit crimes. If your client is considering these things, if they have depression or addiction or trauma, and they get arrested and perhaps are imprisoned, that is not going to help their symptoms. That is quite the opposite. So we don't want to just, encourage people to do harm. But if they're going to do this anyway, we can maybe help them reduce harm. I mean, a less controversial way to think about it, if you have a client who's an adult, 21, and they say, I'm going to go to my friend's party this weekend. I'm going to get hammered. We're going to drink so much alcohol. It's going to be great. You could say, how are you going to get home? Or be sure, don't leave your drink unattended. Remember a month ago when you did that and you had a terrible time the next day and you said you would never drink again? It's just a conversation that we're having, identifying risks, trying to maximize benefits. Well, if you're going to this party to have a great time, is alcohol going to help or not? Should you drink water? Should you eat food? Who are you going with? We want to maximize benefits. And that benefit could be, I want to have fun. That benefit could be, I want to deal with my trauma. It could be, 100 different things.
We've had some conversations before on the podcast about psychedelic assisted therapies and other, I'll call it adjunctive therapies that are not the old school mainstream sit on a couch or a chaise lounge across from somebody or behind somebody and talk. Can you share a bit of the reasoning and research behind the use of psychedelics in mental health treatment? Because, we could spend a whole hour, more than an hour just talking about that. But there is so much misinformation and controversy. And I'll admit, way back when, at least when I was in grad school, none of this stuff was discussed. And then the first time that someone brought it up, I'm like, wait, what? What are people doing? So can you speak to those people a little bit and kind of lay the groundwork for this is why people are considering this, and whether it's for mental health reasons or not, like here's kind of the reality of what's happening?
Gladly. I could talk about this for hours, but I'll give you to kind of give a brief overview. So psilocybin, which again is the probably the most hyped, the most media friendly psychedelic, at least out here in Oregon, probably nationally. So psilocybin is there are dozens, if not hundreds, of species of mushrooms throughout the world that contain a chemical called psilocybin. If you eat these mushrooms, your brain, or your body somewhere, converts psilocybin into psilocin, which then enters your brain and it affects the 5-HT2A receptor, among others. There are many different kinds of serotonin receptors. Psilocybin hits a few of those. And then you have effects. It changes the way that you perceive yourself and the world around you. When I think of the word psychedelic, right, it means to manifest the mind. Some people call these things hallucinogens or entheogens, or an older term, not so popular anymore, psychotomimetic, to mimic psychosis. That was one of the first kind of research questions back in the 50s was, do these things lead to a schizophrenia-like experience? And no, they don't. But that was an idea. That was a hypothesis that people had. So, but psychedelic is my preferred term because I think that the most basic foundational thing that these do is they take non-conscious material and bring it up into consciousness. I think of consciousness as, I explain to my clients, if you're in a dark room and you shine a flashlight around, that's the flashlight is consciousness. It's an active, it's a thing that we do. It's kind of an adjective. So I'm shining my flashlight of consciousness around and I can see boxes and books and piles of clothes and whatnot. And those things are always there. The flashlight doesn't make them appear, but I can just be aware of them or not. And when you take a psychedelic, that flashlight maybe becomes more of a spotlight. It just expands what you can look at. And that's not good or bad. So that can bring up things like trauma that you haven't wanted to think about in a long time. That could bring about something like feeling love, if that's something that you haven't noticed in a long time. So much of it depends on set and setting, or in the fancy research language, we call these extra pharmacologic factors. What's your mindset? What's your intention? What kind of room are you in? Who are you doing it with? Are you doing this at a rave or on a therapist's couch? There are many different factors. In the research world, they've come up with kind of a standard protocol where you have several preparation sessions, get to know the therapist and client, build some rapport, come up with these intentions, like, why are you doing this? What is the outcome you're looking for? Classic therapist stuff, if I could wave a magic wand and your issues were solved, what would your life look like? And then you have a psychedelic session, which the standard treatment protocol that's evolved over the decades is the client reclines on a couch or a recliner, sometimes cushions on the floor. They take the medicine, they wear an eye mask, and listen to music, maybe headphones or maybe music in the room. And then they just kind of lay there for a few hours. If it's a psilocybin experience, that might be like 3 or 4 hours. Ketamine, it's maybe 1 or 2 hours. And then they, for all intents and purposes, if someone were to just kind of observe them from the outside, they might be taking a nap. Sometimes they'll wake up, or, quote unquote wake up. They'll like sit up and might want to talk. They might get agitated, they might cry, they might laugh, they might do all sorts of stuff, but we try to encourage a more inward journey. And then the effects of the medicine wear off and we talk about it. And then there's some integration sessions afterwards to just kind of continue to explore that, like what happened. Where did you go? How did that affect you the rest of the day? Any strong, powerful experience. If you go on a trip, like literally go on a trip to another country or something, maybe that was a wonderful, magical time when you climbed that mountain or went to this amazing restaurant in Italy or something like that. And you're aglow coming back from that trip. But then it kind of fades after time. It's just the nature of memory. It all just sort of goes away. And then after months or years, it's just another memory like any other memory of that time that I went on that trip and climbed that mountain. So integration therapy helps to kind of bring those insights or those feelings into daily life so they don't fade away.
Thank you. I think you're painting the landscape. I may be way off about this because it's certainly not my specialization. Some version of psychedelic assisted therapy really hit societal awareness in the 60s and the 70s relating to post-traumatic stress disorder. Can you expand a little bit on why the field, so some folks in the field looked at this mind-altering opportunity and went, you know what we should do? And then also where it went, because as I understand it, those are some of the building blocks for where we are now of using these substances to alter perception and relation to one's experiences, particularly as they relate to trauma. Can you expand on that?
Trauma, it's a big one. Yeah, and even in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, we didn't, I don't think anyone was trauma informed in the way we consider that language nowadays. But there was still an understanding that trauma affects people. People have difficult childhoods and things like that. A lot of the big therapy in the time was psychodynamic, very Freudian or neo-Freudian. So that was all about childhood. So maybe they didn't use the same kind of language, but a lot of the same ideas, right? Trauma affects us. We have adverse childhood experiences, and they alter how we are as adults. So in that kind of psychodynamic lens, if you take something that helps you to free associate or helps to connect with these early childhood memories in a structured, safe setting with an analyst sitting behind you on the lounge, then you can perhaps navigate those or connect with blocked memories or things like that. Trauma therapy back in the day, 50s and 60s, was kind of the height of research. They were looking at how there were a lot of research studies specifically on LSD at the time. That was the number one. Then there were over 12,000 participants, if you just kind of add it all up, who were given LSD in the 50s and 60s. Something like 2,000 studies. Forgot the exact number. But a lot of research, right? And there was some, their research methods weren't as rigorous as we have them now either, but there was definitely some real data out there. A lot of people were using this stuff in therapy and also, outside of therapy as well. And when they were criminalized in the late 60s, those therapists never stopped. I mean, some of them did, of course, but there's been a continuous thread of underground psychedelic therapy from then to the present. And so over the decades, people have come up with these kinds of protocols like I was talking about earlier. It's just sort of what seems to work. People talking, these therapists would still talk to each other and kind of trade ideas. And I did this and it, ruined the session. And then someone else, oh, well, I did this and it seemed to help. Let me teach you how to do that. And so this protocol that I mentioned, where you're just kind of lying down and listening to music, that evolved over decades of trial and error. It's certainly, I could tell you some stories, but they're like back in the day, like in the 40s and 50s, no one knew, like we as like doctors and therapists, we didn't know how to handle this. And people were doing all sorts of things, which you would never do today. So there's an unbroken lineage of doing therapy and trying to figure out how these things can be useful in different kinds of therapy, couples therapy, group therapy, very interesting stuff. And that's informed how these trials are being conducted now. There seems to be an idea that, again, this kind of comes from the psychoanalytic background that a lot of this stuff was steeped in back in the 50s. But there seems to be an idea that we have trauma, often from childhood, but it could be from adulthood as well. And if we as adults can connect with that, if we can process it without being overwhelmed by it, then that is in some way beneficial. And depending on your theoretical orientation, you could use a lot of different language for that, right? We could talk about parts work if you're into IFS, or releasing held somatic energy, or confronting your parent figure, your objects, and whatever your theory is, you can again, it's psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. So if you're doing Jungian work or CBT or somatic work or whatever it is, the idea is that the psychedelics can kind of help stir things up a little bit, just kind of break your patterns and your habits so that you can more easily connect with the therapy and connect with yourself.
From a therapeutic standpoint, we live in a world where we're all about the outcomes. I see more information weekly about different psychedelic assisted therapy options, whether that's like for a therapist to go on a retreat and try it and then start integrating the work into their own therapy practice or whatever it is. Can you do a quick blurb just about like the research of like, yes, there is a lot of research to support that this can help resolve some symptoms in a positive way? And then as kind of a second question, can you talk a little bit about the likelihood of that? I know part of our conversation we're going to get to talking about harm reduction, but I think many clients, it's been my experience, walk into some, if not all modalities and go, I'm going to do this thing and then it's going to make me feel better and then I'll be good. Because like, I think we've all been there, whether it's therapy or it's like this rash that won't go away or those headaches, where you're like going to go to the pharmacy, get the cream, and then it's going to be good. And then it's like, oh, how often is it actually good? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Great questions, and very practical questions, right? So interesting, numbers in a study, and look at this great table and this pie chart, but like in real life, to the actual clients, what kind of effects are there, and do those effects last? So psilocybin, again, as an example, there was a recent meta-analysis by Yao et al., 2024. They looked at 126 studies, which is a very large number. And that must be then, to have that large of a number, that must be kind of the older stuff as well as the newer stuff. And they find that over all of the kinds of psychedelics, just like if it's called psychedelic assisted therapy, so putting all of this stuff into a pot, LSD and mescaline and, all of these things, psilocybin showed the strongest therapeutic effect of all of them. Really big effect size. If you look, there are some other meta-analyses looking at specifically psilocybin, and we see that across 8 studies, over 500 participants, there was a very large effect size for depression and anxiety in particular. We see that, so again, there's this like long process, of it's usually 3 or 4 weeks of treatment, although different companies now are trying to shorten that, because that's a lot. Like, that's a lot of time and money and involvement. Like, could we just do one session? Like, how much prep work could we just do one session of prep work maybe? And so they're starting to, change the variables of the protocol itself. But generally, so there's this long thing, and you can then do the short-term outcomes, and then you can do the long-term outcomes, which cost more money, and there's always attrition. I noticed that in my research days, if we have 50 people at the end of the study and we try to do a 6-month follow-up, we might get 20 people, because people just live their lives and forget about things. So it's really hard to do those long-term follow-ups, but we can say for sure that psilocybin in particular continues these antidepressive or anti-addiction effects for 8 weeks at least, which is pretty good. And with one of the more recent ones that just came out, so this is a private, a for-profit company called Compass. They're doing some psilocybin research, and they had a depression study that they published in 2022. 230 participants. That's a lot of people. 37% had remission of depression at the end of study. The placebo arm, 18% response rate. So 37% to 18% response rate. And they were able to look at that for up to 12 weeks. Let's see. So that response rate was at the very end of the study. Your final therapy session, fill out these forms, 37% response rate. 12 weeks after that, they were able to bring some of their people back, and 20% of participants still had that sustained response rate or remission rate. So 20%, no depression anymore, based on whatever the criteria was using the PHQ-9 or the HAM or whatever. So no more depression, and that's pretty good. From like this Compass study, I think was just one dose. One dose of psilocybin, as opposed to taking Lexapro or Prozac or something like that. That would have been every day for 12 weeks or every day for, 5 years. And a lot of my clients, I'm sure a lot of your clients, they're like, well, maybe I could, maybe an antidepressant is right for me, but I don't want to get addicted to that. I'm afraid of withdrawal. And that's real stuff. I've seen people going through, I've gone through antidepressant withdrawal. Like, that's no joke. It's, that is worth considering and having a good conversation with your prescriber, not so much your therapist. But so instead of that, and the fear, whether it's true or not, but the fear, like, I'm going to have to take this forever, compared to I could take psilocybin once and then maybe I'm not depressed anymore. Like, that's the hope. That sometimes happens for sure, but it doesn't always happen. We have more research here from ketamine about kind of remission rates and like how long does this effect actually last. And the way that ketamine is used as a psychedelic is a little bit different than how psilocybin or things like that are used in the research world, but it's close enough that I'm, pooling all of this stuff together. So we see that by the end of a ketamine treatment protocol, we have rapid acting antidepressant effects. That's one of the other amazing things. If you give someone who is depressed, they're usually, to be included in one of these trials, they have to have tried, several kinds of therapy and other drugs. And they call these people treatment resistant, which I hate that title. So it's like you're just, you're like a resistant child or something. I don't.
You refuse.
Yeah. So I don't like the name, but that's just what it's called, right? So people with treatment resistant depression take ketamine and they have antidepressant effects within hours. Someone, again, like Lexapro or Prozac, you got to wait 4 weeks, 6 weeks. And sometimes that's too long. I didn't say before, the last job that I had, like as an employee before I went off on my own, the last job I had, I answered phone lines for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And I can tell you, sometimes I feel a certain way today, and I might feel better a month from now if I take this medicine every day and the side effects aren't too much. Sometimes that's just too long.
Yeah, it's a tough sell.
Yeah. So ketamine and psilocybin and these things, they have this rapid acting antidepressant effect. And then with ketamine, we have the most research for remission rates. And we'll say that it does tend to wear off after 2 to 3 months. And by wear off, that's not a very specific language, but the depression scores can go up again. These rumination and shame and things like that. So you get, in the ketamine world, you often will then sign up for like a booster dose. So you have like your initial treatment, and then maybe you'll come back every 3 months for a little bit more, once a season or something like that, or once a year, or just kind of as needed. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes I've definitely seen clients and known people in my life that they just have that one treatment and they're good for, months or years. But I also wonder, what else is happening in between that time? Is this person continuing on in therapy?
Yeah. What are the confounding variables?
Yeah. Or was there, some sort of life-altering event? Or, who knows? There's so many different variables.
Thank you. Thank you for taking that jaunt over into the lay of the land. Going now into the real world kind of application of this experience. It has been my lived experience. I cannot count how many times where a client either gives you that look where they're like thinking about whether they're going to say something, or they just like let it tumble out of their mouths really quickly. And then you're like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. And then there's that little kind of internal scramble of like, what am I going to do with this information? With social media being what it is, with Google being what it is, clients are way more able to access information about their care or, their symptoms or what they think might be going on with them than ever before. It may not always be accurate or applied to them, but nonetheless, lots of information. What should a therapist's response ideally be when this client says, I am going to try psychedelics, or I already have and I just didn't bring it up, or I forgot, or I actively didn't want to tell you.
That can be a tough situation, especially you're not expecting it. Maybe this is the client that you're like, oh, really? You were going to do that? Oh, wow. So just holding space, it's just that therapeutic rapport, that alliance, that presence. Like that's like what therapy is, or a big chunk of it, I think, is just having relationship between two people. Forget about all the theories and the diagnoses and whatever, but just kind of being there with someone. And so continuing that, especially if there's a power imbalance, whether we like it or not. And so for a person to be vulnerable and oftentimes admit to illegal activities, there's, that's a particular kind of vulnerability. And so you want to just be like, just talk about it like anything else. If someone brings up suicidal ideation, you don't want to I don't want to make a big deal out of it. I mean, it is kind of a big deal if someone's talking about suicidal ideation, but I don't want to like freak out. I don't want to like make it seem like it's a big deal. I want to just, hey, thanks for telling me. This is a conversation that we can have just like any other conversation about anything. And it doesn't really matter what the context is, because we're just two people and we're talking and we trust each other, so just normalizing it, especially if it's, sometimes people bring it up and there's maybe some hesitation or like kind of a little worry. I'm not sure if I should tell you this. Is this going to go in my permanent record? Are you going to, you can tell anyone about it? So just being reassuring, this is just something we can talk about. Thank you for telling me. And then you can go into more questions about safety and treatment plans, even though, so psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, we're not doing that, right? That's a different paradigm. But if we just still take the name of it, right? It's psychotherapy. And then the psychedelic once or twice comes in to assist that. So if your client is doing this on their own, like, hey, I'm gonna go do this thing this weekend. Let me tell you about it. What do you think? Again, you're doing therapy. You have treatment plans. You have goals and objectives. Does this experience fit in with that treatment plan? Is this, problematic substance abuse that is getting in the way of the client's goals, or is it helping them move towards their goals? They probably think it's going to help them move towards their goals, whatever those goals are. Whether what they think, they might think it's going to help them when you might think, maybe that's not really going to move you towards your goals. But at least that's kind of the way to frame it. Like, how do you think this is going to help you?
Can we do a little bit of role play? So I am your client, Dr. Peter, and I saw this tiki-talkie that gave me all this helpful information, and I have been struggling with some flashbacks and depression for as long as I can remember. And I have a friend who, was able to get some stuff, wink, and we're going to do it this weekend. I thought you should know.
Thanks for telling me. That's really interesting. I mean, we haven't talked about anything like that before. So I wonder, what was in the TikTok, or like why do you think that this is why might this be helpful for you?
I have a friend's brother that also was having a really hard time with depression and anxiety, and he did some ketamine work and it really helped. My friend, don't ask me how, but my friend got a hold of some magic mushrooms, and I kind of figure I have nothing to lose. So this TikTok reminded me that there are other options outside of like walking into CVS that might be able to help me.
Yeah, so help with flashbacks, help with the, some of that hypervigilance that we've been talking about for the last few sessions, right? That's kind of what you're hoping for. Well, there's definitely research out there, right? So you're talking about your family member, whoever it was, taking ketamine, and then you have access to some mushrooms. So those are different. Those are different kinds of medicines. They have different uses, different risks, different ways they work in the brain. But there is sometimes, for sure, people use these things, either one of those, to help with depression and trauma and stuff like that. So there's all sorts of conversations and posts and videos and stuff. So I'm wondering, is that, when you bring this up to me, is this something that you're looking for guidance or approval, or, what should we talk about?
Well, I feel like it's something that you should probably know. I think I'm worried about a bad trip. I'd say that's my biggest fear. Like I've heard stories since I was a kid about, like the walls are bleeding and the trees are trying to attack me while we were out camping or whatever. And that's probably like my biggest fear. So I guess there's part of me that's like, what have I got to lose? But then there's this other part of me that's like, oh my God, I don't want to give myself a trauma that makes something even worse when I'm hoping it's going to make it better.
Yeah, absolutely. You do have something to lose. 100%. I can appreciate the frustration at we've made progress, right? But it's not the progress that you were hoping for. Or, we've kind of, there's still a lot of ups and downs. Feels kind of stalled sometimes. So I can appreciate that frustration. Want to try some different things, but there is risk, like with anything. Bad trips happen for sure. The way I think about them is there's challenging or difficult experiences. Sometimes taking mushrooms just causes anxiety, even in like the best of like research or clinical circumstances. Like it'll increase anxiety, and you might remember things or feel things that you haven't wanted to in a while. And that's very unpleasant. But sometimes there can be a lot of benefit afterwards when you get on the other side of that. I mean, you and I have been talking for a while now, client, that we need to just about being present. Right? Instead of habitually distracting from the unpleasant feelings, we need to just practice holding space and slowing down to allow those feelings to come in, right? So imagine doing that same kind of work that we've been doing, and also there's the walls are breathing and all sorts of complicated things are happening to your body or in the world around you. It can make it a lot easier to do that work, or it can make it a lot harder to do that work.
I think I'm also afraid that if it's not pleasant, digging deep here, I think I'm going to feel embarrassed and I don't know how to talk to you about it.
Well, we're talking about it right now. So that's the first step. What would you like to happen? What would you like things to be like next week when we talk? How do you expect to be different afterwards?
How I heard psychedelics described once was after doing them, noticing that you're doing some like mundane activity, like doing the dishes, but you just find yourself humming, that you're like a little bit more relaxed and not as bothered, maybe not as weighed down. That is certainly my hope.
Yeah, I like that. There's maybe those thoughts and feelings are still there, but they're just not weighing you down quite as much. They're not as heavy. That would be great. Regardless of how you get there, I would love for you to feel that next week or, next month. So that's where, that sounds really nice. That I would love for you to feel that. I mean, regardless of how you get there, what the methods are, we could talk about that, but I would love for you to feel less burdened and just make for life to be a little bit easier like it used to be. That would be wonderful. So I wonder if that doesn't happen, then you would feel what? You would feel embarrassed, or you would feel let down or something like that.
Or worse yet, I would feel worse. I'm also like, there's part of me, like I trust my friend, and I guess this feels more comfortable to me than doing substances that are like, I guess, pills, because it's like, oh, like this is like a literal thing from the ground, it's in my mind, it's in the same category as pot. But yeah, I have safety issues or concerns, and I also have worries about feeling worse after.
That can happen. Yeah. I mean, first, I hear a lot like these are plant medicines. These are natural things, as, it's not coming out of a lab, but, cyanide is naturally occurring. There are a lot of plants in the world that make cyanide, and that is not something I would ever want you to take. There's like natural doesn't always mean like healthy necessarily, but I get what you're saying. It doesn't have, trans fats and all this processed stuff. And there's a lineage, there's thousands of years people have been using mushrooms instead of, a few decades that people have been using the Wellbutrin that you're on. So I get it, but it's not quite, natural is good and manufactured is bad. You could feel worse afterwards. You could feel better. You could feel the same. I think a lot of that, what the research has been showing is that a lot of that is about how you prepare ahead of time, and then what the actual like setting and environment is like during, how well you trust your friend, and are you going to do this inside or outside? Do you trust that this is safe? There are many unsafe kinds of mushrooms in the world. So do you, how confident are you? There aren't any easy tests that you can just, buy off the shelf to like be sure about that.
End scene for now. Like you and I could keep going because this is like so interesting, and I'm like just eating up everything you're saying. Okay, so what I got from that conversation was a non-judgmental stance with my client's disclosure and curiosity about like what is the plan, what are my expectations, and then also you were starting to get into like safety considerations as well. There's only so much you and I can talk about in an hour, and there are other trainings on this too. But I really like how you were having this conversation that was grounded in psychoeducation, and it felt very organic. Granted, you've been doing this for a long time, so I'm not exactly surprised by that. But I think it was really good food for thought. Would you mind if we did a quick role play around a bad psychedelic experience? So let's get on. You and I have this conversation, this imaginary client, and then I come in a week later after the weekend with said friend, and things did not go as we hoped. So, open scene. I'm kind of ashamed to tell you that mushrooms and me are apparently not friends. And I was at my friend's house, thought I was safe. She said she was getting her stuff from somebody reputable. She didn't have a bad experience, so I don't think it's like there was something in it. I don't think it had been altered. I freaked out. And it was like the worst haunted house you could possibly imagine. I can't stop thinking about it. I find myself waking up at night because I've had dreams about it, and I don't know what the hell to do now because it just made everything so much worse.
Damn, I'm sorry to hear that. That's rough. And that was what, 3 days ago, 4 days ago? So, and it's just been like with you. So I think first, you don't need to feel any guilt or shame about that. This is something that happens sometimes. And I want first, if it's okay with you, let's just kind of practice. I love coming back to the breath. That's always my first thing. So if it's okay with you, just like right now, let's just kind of notice that for a minute, right? Just come back to the present. We've been working on this. And what do you notice? What about it? So later on, maybe, I'd love to hear what happened during. Like that's very interesting, but we'll put that aside for now. What's happened since then? That's, let's start with that. How have you been today? How were you yesterday? Let's just kind of start there. What have you noticed?
I feel like I'm not taking deep breaths. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. Like I'm afraid that something is going to trigger it, and then I'm going to lose touch with the reality around me and have intrusive thoughts. Like those thoughts that you and I've talked about before are just going to pop up. But like this time now it's different stuff. It's not even like the same stuff. Now it's like kind of fantastical, like something out of the labyrinth, but like terrifying. So in my day-to-day, I feel like I'm not taking very deep breaths, and I just feel kind of more scared and more on edge.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So all the more reason, right? So I want you to keep telling me about it, and also notice your breath, right? If you feel like you're not taking deep breaths, you're probably not. So you just notice breath as we're talking about this. And so there's a lot of thoughts, noticing a lot of images, memories, voices. Like what are some of the thoughts? What are some of the emotions?
Because of time, I'm going to end right now, and I want to keep going. But I see what you're doing here, Dr. Peter. And it sounds to me a lot of the care with a client post psychedelic use, if it hasn't been positive, is about grounding and a very trauma informed kind of slow exploration of all the sensations, and then kind of unpacking. I'm guessing where you're going with this, but unpacking and kind of connecting these ideas from now and a few days ago when that happened, and then probably my past. Am I right?
That sounds great. Yeah, I think, with like regular trauma therapy, whatever that even means, I guess, regular trauma therapy, but with, non-medicine or non-psychedelic trauma therapy, like if a client just comes to you and like first session is like, let me tell you about this time this thing happened, hopefully you would say, slow down. Let's not jump right into it. And sometimes they think maybe that's what they saw on TV or something, right?
Yeah, if I dump it all out, I'll get rid of it and then it'll be okay.
Yeah, and that's no good. That could just re-traumatize. That could just be very dysregulating. So similarly, in a way, I don't really care what happened during the experience. Obviously, I care very much, but like in a way, way, like we could pause that, what's happening now, coming back to the present. I like to always break things down with my clients into thoughts, emotions, and body sensations. Those are like the 3 buckets that I use. It's probably, a lot of us use that. So yeah, we're just kind of coming into the here and now and maybe working our way backwards rather than that immediate, like, tell me the worst thing that ever happened to you. We don't need to do that. And one of the free resources that I have on my website, hint, hint, is I have like a little PDF guide for, what if, for exactly this, what if your client comes to you and is like, here's what I did last week. Peter's Processing Principles. That was a fun name to come up with. So first we're going to assess for safety. And so with this client, if they have suicidal ideation in the past, or, you did say something about intrusive thoughts. So I would definitely want to, like, what kind of thoughts are you having? We would definitely pick up on that. 'Cause sometimes that happens. Especially with clients who have suicidal ideation before the MDMA or whatever experience, they might continue to have that afterwards, even if it's a wonderful positive experience, even if it's a negative one. So we definitely want to be assessing for safety. And then there's kinds of grounding skills, whether it's breath or the senses or rocking or, just whatever. I'm sure you're teaching your client grounding and like kind of mindfulness skills, no matter what your theoretical orientation is, right? So you're already doing that stuff. So just do that stuff. Like in a way, one of the biggest kind of like, in a way, like a psychedelic, a mind-opening and eye-opening experience that I had when I first really like researching this stuff and like, what is integration therapy? A lot of it is just regular therapy stuff. Like it's really not all that different. Like you can do like, there are certainly more specialized interventions and like there's some like rabbit holes we could go down where it is like its own special thing, but a lot of it really isn't a special thing. You're just doing the same things with your client. Like, oh, you're having intrusive thoughts because, you, during the mushroom trip, this thing happened and now suddenly you're triggered every time you see hats, whatever. I don't know. So let's, if you're a CBT kind of person, like, well, let's just notice the thoughts that you have when you see a hat or, how do you feel that fear in your body or whatever interventions you're already an expert at, just do that.
Thank you. I really appreciate kind of that simplicity and also like you acknowledging like this is a thing. And for time limitations today, we can't talk about when things go great, but we're talking about, when things didn't go so great. One of the pieces I want to end with, because I feel like we can't have this conversation without talking about this piece of it. I have had clients go through different types of formalized psychedelic therapies, whether that's done in clinic or that was done on a trip to another country for a 4-day retreat or whatever it was. When it's done in that way, these things are super expensive. And we're getting into a world where some of this stuff, depending which particular treatment we're discussing within the umbrella, may or may not be covered by insurance, but let's just roll with it's not going to be covered by insurance, or at least it's very unlikely. That leaves most people who are not extremely wealthy to see that little video or talk to that friend or whatever and go, I want to do that. And then the next thing is, where does one get the products to do that? Can you talk about that piece of it a bit? Because I've talked with providers that do psychedelic assisted work or work with clients who are kind of doing it outside and then bringing the stuff, not the goods, into therapy, but even potentially, actually, I've heard of that too. Can you speak about that side? Because we're really kind of in two camps where this is either a very, very expensive treatment or this is something that's like, shh, don't tell anybody. There's a guy if you knock 4 times. Can you speak on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I hear from my clients sometimes, like I don't ask them like, oh, how much did you pay for that? But sometimes they tell me about things. And for sure, if it's, I don't know the exact numbers. I'm sure you could find it online. But if you want to go out, you could just like buy enough mushrooms for, $50, probably less. Or you could go to an above ground, legal, certified Oregon psilocybin service center for like $1,000. So $50, $1,000. That's a big difference. And I know psilocybin facilitators and service center operators. I used to be an instructor at one of the psilocybin facilitator training programs. These people are not greedy. Like, it's not $15 or $2,000 because they want to buy a yacht. Like, that's just because this stuff is Schedule 1. Psilocybin is criminalized, and that just has certain implications, mostly about taxes and risk, and that's just what they need to break even. And so if you're mad, if you're like, these people, like, why is this so expensive? It's the federal government's fault. It's not the small business owner's fault. So just to put that out there. And so for most of our clients who can't afford that, or going to Peru or Jamaica or something like that sounds fun. I would love to go to Jamaica, but that's way outside my price range. So it's not really, it's not like they're choosing psychedelics over therapy. They're choosing something over nothing. And that's a big difference, right? We're trying to do the best we can, any of us, in this hyper-capitalist, hyper-individualist world. And it's just not really made for health, because health is a commodity. Access to health, I should say, is a commodity instead of just a good or a right. So that's another thing I don't want to judge people for. I mean, I'm not a judgy kind of guy, but like, especially like, why are you doing that instead of legally? Or ketamine therapy sometimes can be covered by insurance, occasionally, or certainly, the before and after. Again, the preparation and integration for ketamine therapy, that's just therapy. That's just 90837, no big deal. So that's easily coverable. It's just the ketamine session itself. Sometimes part of it can be covered, sometimes not, and that's, more detail than we can get into today, but it's more achievable, but it's still not like cheap. It's still not achievable for like someone who's on Medicaid, and those are the people who need it the most, perhaps.
As you and I record this, we're both sitting in Oregon. So we have some different laws than other places do. I'm imagining a client saying, okay, I've decided I want to do this. Can you recommend anybody? I can't afford to go to that clinic that's across state lines and, it's not legal in my state or whatever it is. Can you recommend anybody?
Oh, yeah. So that's a hard no for me. I do know some therapists who, you said sometimes people will like bring the thing to session. No one's ever done that to me, but I do know some therapists who feel that they're, where their line is, where they're, we each get to pick for ourselves what we feel is professional and unprofessional. And some people will, if your client can bring in a powder, like if you're just buying something, right? Like you just get like a baggie of white powder. It could be literally anything. It could be fentanyl. It could be anything, right? It could be sugar. It could be MDMA. We have no idea. But you can buy reagent testing kits that will show presence or absence of a compound. It won't tell you about purity or potency, but it'll do presence. Like, yes, there is in fact MDMA in this baggie of white powder, or no, there probably isn't, which is better than nothing. So I know some therapists that keep those testing supplies in the office. I don't. That's a little too much for me, but I like the idea of it. I see that's harm reduction for sure. Like if your client could have like the best, most prepared thing possible, and the best intention and setting and playlist and everything for an MDMA experience, but then whoops, they took ketamine because they didn't know, or they, took, a stimulant.
Right. And speaking as someone who also has worked in substance use treatment for years, what people are told they're getting and what they actually get are not always the same. And so like, I appreciate what you're saying, which is like, this is where I'm going to stay in my lane.
Yeah. Which again, that's so the most dangerous thing about any of these drugs, whether it's, heroin or psilocybin or anything, the most dangerous thing is that they're criminalized. And that leads to unknown potency and purity and adulterants, either on purpose or mostly it's accidentally. But, so that increases harm for people and for society. So I can appreciate a therapist wanting to provide harm reduction, like to do the testing. But for me, that's kind of, is that aiding and abetting? Because that's I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how to answer these questions, but that's what that's what people are asking themselves, or what your therapist should be asking themselves. And the best paper that kind of covers a lot of these ethical questions, like, am I aiding and abetting my client to commit crimes, is by, there's a paper in 2021, lead author Brian Pilecki, who's here in Portland. He's a great guy, and it's called Ethical and Legal Issues in Psychedelic Harm Reduction and Integration Therapy. It's a very clear title, right? And so we're wondering exactly about this sort of stuff. Like, there's legal issues And then there's ethical, because what does the Oregon Board of Licensed Professional Counselors and Therapists have to say about this? And usually their answer is, just what does the ACA ethics code say? It's basically their answer. But actually, when I started doing this work, I asked specifically, I called them up. I'm like, I'm interested in maybe adding psychedelic integration therapy as a thing that I offer and sell. Is that okay with you? Is that like, do you have concerns or like hoops I should jump through? And this was Lonnie at the time. Well, the guy who answered the phone, wonderful man. He said, well, I can't directly answer that question, but how do you prove anything? I could say that I work with children. I have no training. I should not work with children, but I could say that on my Psychology Today profile, right? I could say that EMDR is like a big seller. I could pretend like I know how to do EMDR because I need to like get some extra clients in, right? But how do you actually prove scope of practice? And so he said to me on the phone that in Oregon, and this is probably true of every other state, I would imagine, they want you to be able to prove education, experience, and training. And if you can prove that, then you can do it. How do you prove it? That's kind of open-ended, but that's where things like CE certificates, to be able to, here's a piece of paper that says that I've got some education in this. I've done some supervision I know this guy named Dr. Peter, and he offers consultation. And so, I've seen him about this client that I was working with, right? So to be able to have some sort of like paper trail or to be able to prove education, experience, and training. And that way you can do psychedelic integration therapy. You could do, ACT or any of those other fancy acronyms that we love. That's how you do anything. So this was all about, so there's legal issues. Is my client breaking the law? Am I helping them? And then there's the ethical issues, and that's where the ethics code and professional associations come in. So those are kind of the two things to think about.
Fantastic. I mean, I know that question is huge, and I love Lottie. This is how you know that you're in a state that is not like highly, highly populated when like we've talked to the same person at the board. So, okay, you've already just given us one resource there. You also had mentioned your own, what I'm going to call the triple P, about like when things go badly on your website. What are some resources that you rely on in addition to, like you said, the ethical guides for your particular license type? Where should people look for more information on what you're talking about?
A great resource for clients and therapists is to look for a psychedelic society. So any city you're in, so you could just do a web search, Portland Psychedelic Society, Boston Psychedelic Society, just, whatever the nearest big city is to your location, your client's location. And then Psychedelic Society, they kind of went through, there's been this kind of push in the last 5-8 years to kind of make everyone use the same name because it's just easier to find on Google, right? So that Portland, for example, that's obviously the one that I know the best. I've done some work for them. I've done some volunteering. I have some talks on their YouTube channel. So this is not an impersonal statement. But the Portland Psychedelic Society is pretty good. I'm told it's one of the bigger ones in the country, and they have groups for clients. They have like integration groups, they have affinity groups. There's one for elders, there's one for women, there's one for people in recovery, which is super interesting. Like, I don't know a whole lot about it, but there's like a whole thing. Like, what if you want to be like in 12-step recovery and use psychedelics? Like, that's a whole rabbit hole right there. Yeah. Or neurodivergent people in psychedelics. So they have a lot of affinity groups. Some of them are in person, some of them are online, and they have one or two for healthcare professionals as well. So get to know your local community is number one. And that's just a great way. If I don't feel comfortable with this stuff, I want to be able to refer out. You're telling me like, I thought that I could talk to you about your psilocybin experiences, but this is getting a little weird. This is a little outside my scope, but I know who I can ask questions, or I know, maybe you can, you and I will keep doing our regular therapy. And then you can also see this other person for a month or two, like specifically for the integration therapy, right? That's kind of a specialist that you see on the side. So, your local psychedelic society is great for that. And it's great for the client to be like, to just not feel alone. If you want to learn the science, if you're like, ooh, please tell me about research methodology. I love learning that stuff. The best one is called Horizons. They got a great YouTube channel. If you want to know like what is the latest research study on on this thing that you can learn from the principal investigator themselves. And that's way better than like hearing on TikTok from a guy who read a thing from another thing who heard about this study, you know.
And then misquoted
Yeah.
it. Yeah, thank you. Okay. And for Dr. Peter, for people who want to learn more specifically about you and about your work, what's the best way to do that?
Well, my my website and social media stuff is Psychedelic Affirming Education. So psychedelicAffirmingEducation.com. That's where you can learn about me and courses that I offer both for clients and professionals. I got my therapy website, peterhaddy.com. So that's for, I'm licensed in Oregon and Washington, but I can do consultations with anyone, anywhere. So those are the two ways to find me. I have Instagram, but I don't use it a whole lot. It's just kind of, I feel like I'm supposed to, but I don't actually like social media.
Well, I have really learned a lot from this conversation, and I assume the same is true for our listeners. It took you years to acquire the information that you have, and I really appreciate you coming on and talking with us about it. We've covered a lot in a little bit of time. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate you coming on, Dr. Peter.
Yeah, I love being here. I love the little role play. That's always, that in a way that never gets easier from grad school, but it also kind of does get easier. So that's always fun. And I like to, help people just kind of move along that spectrum to be psychedelic informed. Like we want all of our therapists to be trauma informed, even if you're not doing trauma therapy, right? So conversation like this is just kind of pushing you along a little bit.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've just finished listening to another exclusive Continuing Ed podcast by Clearly Clinical. If you like what you just heard and you need Continuing Ed credits, please visit us at clearlyclinical.com to check out our one-year membership, where you'll have access to our growing library of Continuing Ed podcast courses. Clearly Clinical, where our goal is to help you learn, grow, and shine.